This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 136 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today we're talking all about photography for travellers, and although I am actually going to talk to 3 photographers, this is definitely not an episode where you need to be a photographer. It's all about, lots of different aspects of, how we as travellers use photography, because I think you'd be hard pushed, especially these days when a camera is in a phone as well, you'd be pretty hard pushed to find a traveller who isn't bringing home some photos of their trip. So I've got 3 guests today talking about 3 kind of different sides of photography for travellers. I'm going to start out with Seng talking about kind of the thoughtful side to travel photography, and then chat with Whitney, who kind of works in the influencer space but actually talks about ways to not make travel all about getting those Instagram pictures. And last but definitely not least, I'll chat with Dale, who has some very practical advice about the kinds of cameras popular with travellers these days. So kind of a varied mix of photography-related stuff that I think you'll all find really useful. In my own case, I have to admit that I long to be a better photographer and have taken a couple of courses, but I don't know, I don't make the time to practice more, and when I'm traveling I'm always in a hurry, so I just kind of go back to to auto mode, and it's one of my great failings in life so far, but one day I will improve my photography, because of course I love coming home with great photographic memories of my trip. I often make photo books and stuff out of them, and of course they go up on my blog and social media as well, so it's something I would really like to improve, but I know it takes time and practice to improve. So I have to make myself do that at some stage. Anyway, someday. So before we get on to chatting to our guests, I just do want to mention Travel Journal School, because coming up in June, there was supposed to be a course in April, in case you remember that, but it's actually going to be in June. And that course will be a 2-week course called Start a Personal Travel Blog. So if you are curious about starting your own blog, it also is a great place to put up your photos as well, then head over to traveljournalschool.com. At the moment there's a form there where you can register your interest, and whether it's for the Start a Personal Travel Blog course or another course that Travel Journal School has coming up. That's my own school, where we run all sorts of courses about travel journal writing and blogging and all sorts of stuff. So just head there and sign up. So on to the episode, and my first guest is Seng Mah, and he is a local buddy here in Perth who works as a photographer and travels a lot, takes tours and stuff to all sorts of cool places. And we had a really interesting chat about kind of what travel photography really is.
Well, travel photography is actually a very broad genre, isn't it? Because basically it means that any kind of photographs that you do when you travel. On a commercial point of view, obviously travel photography is the kind of work that you would do as a professional photographer for, say, tourism agencies or tour operators or hotels and all that on location, in order to sell that destination or sell a particular feature or activity associated with that particular definition. But that's not what I do. I do travel photography in the sense that I take photographs that document what I see, what I experience, the people I meet, the sort of things I come across during my travel. So I suppose it's probably more travel documentary photography rather than travel photography. There's been quite a bit of discussion about what constitutes travel photography, especially in the sorts of competitions that have been getting around. So fairly recently, there's been a bit of a backlash, because there are people who travel with a particular photographer, particular types of photography tours, where the tour organizers will set up your traditional type of portrait shoot. So, for example, they'll pay to have novice monks in a temple in Bagan, in Myanmar, for example, holding candles. So it's all very posed, and they'll light it, and then the photographers take these amazing shots of these monks in this amazing temple with light streaming into the windows. And they enter into competitions and they win great prizes. For example, And that constitutes travel photography because they're taking a photograph and it's travel. Whereas, other people
But it's
look
all
at
been
that
set
and say,
up. Yeah.
it's all been set up. So there hasn't been any kind of and in most cases, the photographers will never interact with the people who have been posed for them, simply because their mission there is to take the photographs and not to actually spend time with the people.
Right.
So there's that aspect of travel photography, which I've done in the past as well, and enjoyed it, but can fully appreciate the comments being leveled about that particular type of photography. And also, I can verify that unless you make the special effort to spend time after shooting with the people there, you're not going to interact with them. You'll just move on to the next thing that you'll be photographing. So what I prefer in terms of travel photography is, and this is something which I've mentioned to guests on the India tour, is to let the photography emerge organically from the engagement and the interaction. So I tell people the mission isn't to go in there and take a photograph of that face, because you're going to get an empty face. It's a face it's an expression that's not coming through any kind of meaningful connection between the photographer and the person you're photographing. When you take a portrait of someone, you don't just run to someone blindly in the street and take a shot.
Yeah.
You're working with someone. You're trying to get to know them. You're trying to find some level of connection with them. And then the photograph emerges through having made that connection. And the same thing, I think, applies if you're photographing people in your travel. I was talking, spend time with the people you meet first, and let the photography emerge organically from that experience. Because what that does then is it takes the fear of taking photographs of people out of the equation, because your focus isn't a photograph. Your focus is getting to know someone, spending time with them, connecting with them, and then the photograph emerges as something that's a value add out of that experience. And because you spend time getting to know them, I think you get a richer photograph anyway, one that's probably composed better because you've spent more time with that person in the environment, and you're taking note of environmental elements that you can include or exclude on photograph. And because by that time you've already made a connection with the person, they're more comfortable with you, and they are probably going to look at the camera as if they're looking at you rather than looking at the camera, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you get more of those genuine moments of connection. But it's not just about faces, obviously, this approach to travel photography. It's about for me, it's about storytelling. So what I often do is, if I'm in a scenario that I kind of think about, what's the story here? And I'm not talking about creating a fictionalized story. I'm basically saying, if I were here as a journalist, for example, or I want to write about what's happening here to someone back home, that's going to make sense to them. That's going to get them to have an understanding of what I feel when I'm in this situation here, what's going on here. Then I'll photograph from that perspective so that the images I make are tied back to that story or that narrative that I want to tell, rather than just blindly shooting without having a focus for it, without having a reason for it in that sense there.
Yeah.
So that story there simply means that there is a deliberate thing that I want to say, and that drives how I actually photograph it. So I create something in my mind that is a narrative, and then I'll say, okay, so I'm not going to shoot for this particular narrative here, and use that to guide the way in which I would photograph when I'm traveling.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And really, it's all about taking the time, isn't it? Whether it's people and getting to know them, or it might be just the landscape and getting to know it, but spending time sitting in it and thinking of this narrative and all of that is, and then what emerges from that is it's going to be far superior to just, I don't know, hop off the bus, point, shoot, done, been there, done that, seeing the beautiful waterfall kind of thing.
Yeah, when they say to writers of fiction, they say even if you're writing fiction, you should still write from the heart. You should still write based on things that you know, emotions that are authentic, that you understand. And I think the same thing happens in photography. You need to have an understanding before you actually take a picture, because then that will guide the way in which you actually take that photograph itself. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about slow travel, because slow travel allows us to savor a place, understand a place, and have a deeper experience of a place, rather than just jumping somewhere for 3 hours and somewhere else for another 3 hours. You kind of get an understanding of that particular place or that person. And I think that drives photography as well. The longer you spend in a place and the longer you get to spend with the people, the more authentic, the more meaningful, and the more powerful, I think, your images are going to be in that respect there. I mean, you can obviously go to a place and do snapshots, but snapshots simply just document, this is what I see, whereas what you want to show through is, this is what it feels like being here, and this is what it feels like talking to this person, and here's this person, and this is what this person is like. Which is why, going back to my experiences in Kolkata, where, I got to spend like a whole morning immersed with these wrestlers in their wrestling hall in the Akhara, was such a deep experience, and the images that came through that felt so powerful to me at that point in time. When I look back at it now, they kind of almost remind me of the sort of feelings that I had when I was there.
I really like the idea of only taking pictures when you've got to know a person or got to know a place, rather than just going in for the snapshot straight away. And it's something I'm going to try on my next trip, actually, is kind of settling into a place before I whip out my camera or my phone and start taking shots. So something to think about. Now, my next guest is Whitney Taylor, and Whitney runs a big Instagram account and does, she's of that age. She's a bit younger than me, where she does influencer work and can, could be one of those people that is always on her phone and always, Instagramming, Instagram stories, all of that stuff nonstop, but she's not. So Whitney and I travelled together in Fiji, so I can tell you for sure that what she says in the coming chat is actually true. So it's good food for thought.
I don't do a lot of writing myself, but I actually love photography. So the way I document my trip is I take my camera with me. I've got a little Fujifilm mirrorless camera, and rather than using my phone, I try to just use my camera to document everything that goes on. And then once I finish taking the photo, I sit down and I enjoy the moment, because I'm really I really do try to be present within whatever moment I'm in, rather than trying to Instagram and do a story and message someone. It's becoming more and more difficult with social media to actually pull away from it. So I really do try and encourage other people when they travel to take photos with your camera and then put it down and experience the moment.
That's such a good idea, because it's also easy to take it with your phone, but then you've got your phone out and then it's too easy to do other things with it. If it's just your camera, that's your camera just does one thing. Yeah, great idea. Yeah.
iPhones, they're getting better, but they're still not as good as taking like a nice real photo.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You're going to experience that moment. You're going to remember it. If you want to write it down in like a little journal, then you have the chance to do that later on when you get back home and print a few photos out and make like a little collage book. But that's definitely one thing that I say to do when you document your trip, and you can use those photos later on within your social media accounts to document everything that you've just done. Yeah, so that's definitely my opinion, is take a good camera.
I think that's excellent advice. And yeah, we have this compulsion that we feel we have to do the social media thing immediately, or it's not real, but it really doesn't matter, does it? Like I'm from Fiji. I didn't do any Instagramming while I was there, and then a full week later I did everything like exactly a week late. It was like reliving it for me, and for people who were watching and looking at that, it doesn't matter that it was a week ago. It's still real experiences and my real thoughts. So and then I could enjoy it once I was back home and it was wintry and horrible here, and I could just pretend for a few moments, a few times a day, that I was back in Fiji.
Yeah, and it's so nice to be able to reflect upon what happened in your trip, and actually to have like a better thought out process of how you can describe this to someone. A photo, photo has, a million, can tell an entire story and has a million words, but if you add a story and some words and information to your photo, that's gonna, and have a well thought out process of that. That's a lot more better than just, taking out your phone and posting a picture for the day.
Yeah, definitely. And because once you've finished the trip, you can actually think about what were really the highlights, what are the things you really want to share, what were the meaningful bits. Whereas if you just do it as it happens, then there's probably a lot more, but more is not necessarily better.
Yeah, and no one wants to talk to the person standing in the corner of the room that's playing with their phone when they could be learning how to cook or learning how to paddleboard or...
Exactly. This chat with Whitney actually made me realise that often when I'm travelling, I'm trying very hard to get photos on my proper camera and on my phone so I can use them on social straight away. Instead of just trying with one, I like her idea of put your phone away and just use your camera, then you're not distracted by all the other stuff as well. And I know full well I can actually just download my camera photos straight to my phone, so there's no need to think, oh, I need them for social. So, yeah, I've learnt a lot just from those few minutes, and on my next trip I'm going to try hard to think of just using my camera more than trying to do both at once. It's a bit of a silly travel blogger thing to do as well. Anyway, my next guest today and final guest for this episode is Dale Neill. I chatted with Dale back, quite some time ago because we've worked together for the Fremantle International Portrait Prize, which is on again soon. Actually, funnily enough, Dale introduced me to Seng, my first guest in this episode, so it's a small world. Anyway, Dale always has lots and lots of stuff to say, and we had a great chat recently, and I've got lots of interesting stories to share from Dale in the future. But for today, what I've got is some more practical advice. Dale, as well as taking tours, abroad photography tours, he also works often teaching people how to take better photos, and so he has some really useful tips about some of the best kinds of cameras that you can use when you're traveling these days.
So what's happened is the old-fashioned SLR cameras, the single lens reflex cameras, they gave away to the DSLRs, the digital single lens reflex cameras, but they were all fairly big and bulky, and along came mirrorless cameras. I don't know, maybe they came in about 8 or 9 years ago, and because they got rid of the mirror and the prism inside the camera, the size of cameras shrunk and they became smaller and lighter, and so did lenses. And a lot of people, especially lightly framed people and people who are perhaps a bit older, they said, oh, this is so good because I don't have to carry a big, heavy DSLR around my neck. I was getting a neck ache, so I like these small cameras. So most of the big companies got on board and they started producing the mirrorless cameras. And now there are lots around with lots of lenses, and many people have changed over to those because the quality coming off them now is extraordinary. It really is. So that's been happening, and what people are also doing, many are realizing that if you take away a camera that's smaller and has got a small lens, what we call, say, the pancake lenses that are fairly flat, people are far more accepting of you going up to them and getting a photograph.
Rather than the huge DSLR in their face.
Absolutely.
Kind of thing with a big lens and interesting.
So people, if you want to move in close and get photographs of people, the smaller camera with the flatter lenses are far more preferable. And the other thing that's happened is lens quality has improved so much that using a flattish wide-angle lens, you take in so much, virtually everything's in focus, and you can afford then to crop later on. So that's been a real trend in travel photography. The other thing that's happened there, of course, is that mobile phones have improved dramatically. And I've got a growing number of students now, mature age students, who are travelling, and they've said, Dale, we're only taking away our mobile phone.
Yeah, right.
And they're coming back with results that are good enough to make books and calendars and be exhibited. So the one tip I would have if you're buying a mobile phone is both the Apple phones, the iPhones, and also the Androids like Samsung. Their very latest models are some of the models are dual lenses. And the dual lenses means that you can flick from one lens to another internally, and it means that the subject is enlarged, and as a result, the quality improves dramatically without actually moving any closer.
Wow.
Now, you are going to pay more for those dual lens cameras, but if you're an avid photographer and you want to use your mobile phone for travel photography, I think it's a good investment.
Well, especially if you're looking to take that with you instead of an actual camera, then paying more is going to be still preferable, isn't it? Because then it's just all there in your phone. That's amazing. I hadn't really understood about the dual lens thing. That's really interesting.
Just be a tiny bit careful. There are some companies around, or perhaps not companies, but some salespeople who will use the word dual in reference to other features of the camera, like a dual axis sensor or something like that.
Right.
But it's really, you want a camera with two lenses, and it's very, very easy to identify. Just look at the back of the camera and you will see two lenses.
Mm-hmm.
So students of mine that have got those dual lens cameras, the quality that they're getting is significantly higher than the ones with just the single lenses.
Right. Interesting. So, and most of the modern, the newer iPhones and newer Samsungs have that as an option.
As an option, yes.
Right, yeah.
And, of course, that dual lens is fantastic for doing things like food photography, and it's also fantastic for doing portraits, because what you're doing there is that you're automatically going to blur the background, so you'll have the subject sharp and the background will be blurry, so your subject is going to become more of a hero in the photograph.
Mm-hmm.
And now I don't have one of those, but my next mobile phone will be a dual lens camera. I think it'll be worth the extra investment.
Yeah. That's amazing. What about with the mirrorless cameras, just going back to them for a second? So you said the quality is much improved. Is the quality like equivalent to a DSLR, or is it just the difference isn't quite worth?
Look, from the results I've seen from the very latest best quality mirrorless cameras, I think they're absolutely a match for a DSLR.
Wow.
Now, what of course has happened now is that even the cameras, the DSLRs with a full frame sensor, they're now bringing out mirrorless cameras as well. So the very latest Nikon Z6 and Z7, they're full frame cameras, but they're also mirrorless cameras. So they've shrunk in size a little bit. So my feeling overall is that the quality that I've seen is as good as we're getting off the DSLRs, because what the manufacturers have done is also improved lens quality to match that smaller sensor. And so when we add all those new features in, we are getting as good a quality as we were off the DSLRs.
Wow, awesome.
So the one thing I would mention, virtually every brand is producing cameras that have got beautiful lenses, beautiful sensors, good quality. However, there is a bit of a line in the sand, and that is that some cameras are actually easier to learn on.
Ah, interesting.
All right. So if you look at the results of the top 5 or 6 brands, you'd be hard put to see the difference in quality between those brands. But with brand A, you're going to be able to go in and probably learn in a fifth or a tenth of the time as you would off brand C. So one of the things to be careful of is to make sure that you buy a camera that's what we call, it's got good intuitive logic.
Mm-hmm.
And that is very easy to find your way around.
Right.
And a very, very simple little tip here: when you go to buy a camera, have a couple of features of the camera that you're thinking about buying in the back of your mind, like, let's say, changing the ISO on the camera,
mm-hmm.
and keep the number 3 in your mind. And you go into the camera shop and you ask the salesperson to say, "Can you please show me how to change the ISO?" Count the number of keystrokes that they take.
Right.
If it's 3 or less, then that's Is that a crow?
Yes, sorry about that crow. I don't have much control over him.
No. I've got a cockatoo here. If that's good for competition. So you asked the salesperson, can you show me how to change the ISO? 3 keystrokes or less, that's good.
Right.
Now, for example, the Fuji that I've got, I can change the ISO in 1 keystroke.
Wow. Okay, that's good.
There is another camera on the market that takes about 9 or 10 keystrokes to change the ISO.
Wow.
So that would be a very slow process if you're in downtown Cairo and you suddenly want to change the ISO because you're going inside a dark building.
Yeah, 9 or 10 steps is not cool. So lots of great tips there. I have to say that I moved from a DSLR to a mirrorless camera a couple of years back, and for exactly the reason that Dale suggests, that's much less bulky and I didn't get a neck ache and all of those things, and it's just kind of easy to have around and still takes pretty good photos. Of course, the photographer, in this case, needs to improve, but the camera itself does a great job. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to episode 136 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. Don't forget to head over to traveljournalschool.com to express an interest in my next course in June, Start a Personal Travel Blog. It's going to be lots of fun, and you will end up with a personal travel blog that you can record your memories on as you travel, and of course upload some of your photos. Thank you very much to all of our wonderful guests today. First up, I chatted with Seng Mah. You can find Seng's work at Venture Photography, which is at venturephotography.com.au. If you're in Western Australia, Seng also runs an awesome Facebook group for photographers called Snap Happy. So just search for that in Facebook, or I'll leave a link in the show notes as well. Thank you also to Whitney Taylor. On Instagram, you can find Whitney at Whitney Lee Artist. The Lee is Leigh. And also a very big thanks to Dale Neill. Always great to chat with him. And at the moment, Dale asked me to mention the Fremantle International Portrait Prize, and that is opening on the 5th of May, so not long after this episode goes to air. This is 2019, and the entries close on the 7th of July. It's open to any kind of portrait photography. They even have a mobile phone section. 2019 is the 5th year, and the proceeds from the award go to charity, but there's also some awesome prizes, so do check that out. It's at fipp.org.au. If you're interested in listening to more episodes about photography, then head back to episodes 57 and episodes 109, where we've chatted before about photography. So if you're looking for them online, just go to notaballerina.com/57 and notaballerina.com/109. Of course, for this episode, the show notes will all be at notaballerina.com/136. Last, but definitely not least, come along and join our fabulous Facebook group. It's called Thoughtful Travellers. You can search for it in Facebook or see the link in the show notes. It's a great fun place where we have lots of very interesting travel-related conversations. Lots of fun to be there. So that's it for our episode on photography for travellers. Thank you very, very much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.